1, 2, 3.
Yes, it's the Late Late Breakfast Show with your host, Bernie J. Mitchell.
Are you in?
Are you in?
So our guest in the Doghouse studio today is Mr. David Keene, and you work for a small company from where, David?
Mountain View, California.
So who are you and what do you do?
So my name's Dave Keene. Thank you for inviting me on, Bernie. I work for Google here out of the UK and do a lot of work across the cold parts of Europe. So we split Europe into two bits, cold parts and hot parts. The part you go on vacation to and the part you go skiing to. I get the skiing side.
When you say the cold parts, do you mean you come to Sweden?
Yeah.
Because that's where I'm talking to you from now.
We should have done it from Sweden. That would have been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, less of the geography. Tell us what you do at Google, David.
So I run marketing for Google for Work. So Google for Work is our initiative to take consumer technologies into businesses, from the smallest businesses all the way up to the biggest mega corporations in the land. We help them with their email, with video conferencing, with storing their files online, using Drive for Work. We have the whole range of consumer technologies that people know and love and that they use at home, and we help businesses put necessary controls and policies in place so that they can manage that in a corporate setting.
I'm going to go straight in here and we'll put links in the show notes about the Atmosphere event that we went to in London.
Sure.
And which is kind of like the cloud force for Google, but a lot less hectic. And I was first introduced to Google Apps in, I think it would have been like 2008, when I was trying to get email to my phone and not go through like long-winded, very expensive things, and kind of been Googling it ever since. And there was one thing that I took away from that day was when someone, and I can't remember who it was, said the term enterprise will disappear and it will just be, cloud or what we do, because everyone's moving to the cloud. So could you open that bit out a bit? Because I'm really interested in like how we work, and the difference between corporates and startups in terms of workflow.
Yeah. So to me, the really, really interesting thing about this, and we recently rebranded the products that we take to market. We moved away from the term Google Enterprise, which is what we did use, and we tried to reframe them, and we've called them now Google for Work, deliberately, because we think the whole enterprise concept is dated and it's becoming, a concept that people don't necessarily recognize. They see enterprise as being the largest corporations out there, whereas the real strength in the economy that we have is like the small, agile, fast-growing businesses. And if you look at those small, agile, fast-growing businesses, they pretty much are all born in the cloud. They don't sit down and say, shall we hire 100 people and build a data center? They sit down and they consume power from the cloud and consume storage from the cloud, and they just do everything in the cloud. It's just very natural for them to be mobile first and cloud first. So this is the really big shift that we see, and that's now filtering up, particularly into kind of teams who are forward-looking inside of big organizations. We call fast growth teams, and also into businesses themselves who want to become more agile, become more like those smaller, more nimble organizations, and just really embrace that whole idea of leveraging the power that's out there without having to put the whole thing in yourself.
I find it really interesting that you've moved away from enterprise. Do you see that as on a personal level, we have personal lives and we have work lives, and that in the personal, there seems to be a blurring of the lines with the digital tools that we're using. Those digital tools are with us all the time. I looked at studies that Gartner were talking about how the first screen of the day is the mobile, even during the night where people get up to pee. And do you think is it something that Google are aware of, that in the workspace, people are looking to use the fantastic tools that they have in personal, so that there is this sort of blurring of boundaries between the two, and that therefore this repositioning that you're talking about is, does that come out from that whole movement?
Yeah, it absolutely does. There's this whole shadow IT concept that's widely debated at the moment. It's very appropriate given that we're coming up towards Halloween, where organizations, their IT departments are not giving their teams the technology that they need. But the technology is there and everybody knows where it is and they're using it at home anyway. So the teams just sign up and they use it. And maybe they expense costs on a credit card, just pay for it themselves. Maybe they just consume personal applications. So people know what technology is available. People know what the cloud can do for them. People know that they can use services that are not necessarily 100% sanctioned by their IT departments, and they're taking matters into their own hands and they're using those consumer technologies. What we do inside of Google for Work is we say there is kind of a third way here. You don't just have to say it's fine for shadow IT to run all over our business, because clearly there's some issues there, particularly around confidentiality, getting the content that's stored outside the enterprise back when if an employee leaves or is fired. How do you get all that material that's sat there in Dropbox somewhere? So we help organizations provision access to things, consumer technologies, manage onboarding and offboarding of employees, give people the facilities that they want from their consumer lives in the workplace itself. And, I find it very, very interesting, the pivot that's gone on from, historically, business had the best technology. It would get the biggest, fastest, chunkiest mainframes. Big Crane would come and bring them in through the window of the IT department. This amazing, big, like Star Trek computer thing. Now what's happened is people at home have the best technology. And businesses are actually running behind. You've got amazing technology at home, and they go into the place of work and they sit down in front of an XP Windows laptop, which takes maybe 15 minutes to boot up, and then applies all sorts of patches and virus updates and God knows what. And it just feels to me like many businesses are living in this kind of old world.
Oh, absolutely.
Huge and super powerful, virtual reality level gaming technology and stuff.
That's why I'm going to say, sorry, Bernie, that's what my wife is principal of Sigtunaskolan here in Sweden, which is, well, it's like Sweden's Eton. And this summer she took the decision to junk everything and put everyone in the whole organization, including the kids, onto Google Chrome, because she felt that, exactly as you said, there was a pivot in the industry, a pivot in the way that we use technology. And so the education as a business and also the training of the future is coming from the personal.
Absolutely. And my kids have been through the same thing this year as well in their school. And the interesting thing there, and I was speaking to the principal of the school at a recent open evening, and he was saying, they've got rid of all of their PCs, they've put everything in the cloud, and they've got a mix of Macs and Chromebooks. And he said, we did this for cost reasons. He was very open with me. He said, we did it for cost reasons. And the reason was we were endlessly paying our services company to update all of the Windows machines and all of the servers that we had. He said, we've put it all in the cloud and we spend a fraction now of money that we did spend with that services company. But he said, the real eye-opener for him has been collaboration that they get. And as a school, they've started using Google Docs really, really widely. So the kids do their work online. The teachers can look at the work and how it's progressing as they're building up their assignments. They can provide comments and feedback to the kids. They can actually see if the kids have done anything. What the evolution of the kids' thinking has been in their particular projects. And then they're using technologies like Twitter extensively as well to communicate, put things out there. And they're just moving to this kind of 100% cloud, social, with large portions of mobile technology, everybody getting some kind of tablet computer. in their hands, and it's a real transformation for them in the way that they work. And the other thing that they've brought in Hangouts with other schools, and they're starting to do joint lessons with them using Hangouts, which he said has been just eye-opening.
Is all this making us more connected, or is it making us more able to produce more, or is it making us move faster? And you're not allowed to say all three, I think, Bernie. What's the real kind of, Blue Train manifesto type?
It's all about, for me, taking friction out of people's day. Whenever we go to our place of work, our place of education, wherever we're going during the day, there's a lot of things that slow us down and take valuable time away from our day, and also make it less easy for us to achieve the things we're trying to achieve. And all we're trying to do is to try and take some of that friction out. We're not trying to super connect people. We're not trying to make people super fast at working. We're just trying to take friction out so that their natural speed comes out.
I find something I've really found recently is, as I've got into a really good workflow, is I've just got more time to think, and that is probably the most attractive thing. And that's to do with things like Google. The Hangout app works better on my phone, and things like Slack make communicating and connecting like Trello and Drive and everything else together much more fluid. And I have less friction in my head, which is the most beautiful thing.
I think as well, simple, beautiful products that are very consumerized in the way that they work and that you don't need to think about to use. Take friction out as well. Whoever was given a training course to go and buy something on Amazon, you just given, how many people out there have been through training for their purchasing and requisitioning systems where they have to kind of endlessly fight to get the things that they need. So I'd say it's all aspects of our lives. It's not just, communication. Things like purchasing, using technologies like Concur to do your expenses, etc. It's all in the cloud. It's easy to do. On the fly, you take a photograph of the receipt that you've got. It gets loaded up. It automatically goes through and connects back to the expense from your credit card. These technologies, they are all just taking friction out of the world.
So the other thing is, I always think of friction in a different context as a good thing, and that is when, particularly, where I work in co-working spaces, it's so much better to work in a co-working space for me because you bump into people, and there's that kind of connected friction there. And so when you said it removes the friction, I got all scared because I was like, I love the friction, but it's
Can I change the word from friction to frisson?
Frisson,
which is kind of like a feeling of excitement that you get from working with other people, like a level of adrenaline that comes in when you sit down with somebody and start having a debate. To me, that's not friction, that's acceleration.
Yeah.
And to me, friction is a bad thing. It's something that slows you down. It's like, I really want to write this thing or produce this document or make this thing that I'm making, and actually I've got to sit here and do something else that's not contributing to the final outcome. And that to me is friction. It's taking away the things that don't contribute to the outcome.
Do you think it promotes creativity across organizations? I mean, in the past, it was, it may be the developers, it may be the creative directors who were responsible for creative thinking. But do you think this kind of frisson that you're talking about, it facilitates more creativity institution-wide across the board of the company?
It's a really good point, but I think there's an extra piece we haven't covered off there necessarily. That creativity comes from the organizational structure and the values more than it does the technology. I think the technology is one piece of it and it's an enabler, but you can still use that technology in a hierarchical, old school way. And putting in place a really great environment where people are empowered, where people want to do stuff, where people are excited, where they're rewarded appropriately, and then giving them technology that just gets the friction out of the way. That's how you create an amazing organization. Just giving them technology, as much as I'd love to say that it will fix all the world's ills, it won't. I think there's a whole thing about how you work and what your values are, and do you have a great diverse workplace? Do you have good values around how you work with your customer, or are you just trying to kind of suck money from that customer the whole time?
That's an interesting point, but I'd sort of come back at you again and say, well, does the technology affect the company culture? Does it affect the values?
It can, I think, would be my point of view on that. I think it can be a change, a force for good. It can drive change. I have seen organizations, though, using great modern collaboration technologies, but working in a really rigid, hierarchical, badly managed way. And a lot of this comes down to great leaders in the business sitting down and saying, okay, what do we value? Do we value putting the customer at the heart of everything? Do we value diversity in our workforce and collegiate relations between the team members? Do we value an open culture? So I think those things, the technology will not force those things. They bring them maybe more to the surface.
I found in WeShare, which is lots of people working remotely in a very, do you know the WordPress book, Year Without Pants? I've always been really up for this, but between Google for Work and Trello, we work in a very open way, and I constantly find myself, even though I'm totally drunk the Kool-Aid on the working openly thing, constantly find myself sending people DMs rather than just talking out in an open Hangout or Slack channel or Trello thing. And it's really refreshing and liberating to be able to share stuff and move quickly. But it's still, even though I'm into it, it's still quite awkward for me to share a thought openly. And I think where I'm going with that is that that's evolved our work culture into working more and more openly. And as a result, of letting go, we move faster.
I think there's an age thing there, Bernie. I notice it with my 15-year-old. He walks up to our computer and talks to it.
Even if it's not on.
He'll be asking you things and it's off.
That's really interesting. My 75-year-old father does the same.
Maybe it's not age then. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's freedom. Maybe it's just like letting go of some barriers.
I'd like to think it's letting go of barriers, and I like to think that's enabled by technology. But I'm also do think, and I'd like to hear your view on this, that we're in this kind of, even us three, we're in this kind of cloudy social echo chamber that, scaringly, a lot of people are still working on XP and locking in.
Yeah, but Bernie, one of the things is when those people go home, they power up their Xbox, they start using gesture-based controls, they talk to their machines at home. And it comes back to this whole concept of what's going on in the home. What are people using in the home? What do their smart TVs do for them? I know we are in a rarefied environment again. But, everybody, or a large percentage of the people out there have just amazing technology.
Well, that point was made very well by my other favourite enterprise level bloke called David, who works in technology. There's a David Chopin, I think it is, from Microsoft, opened a keynote at an event we were at and said, who in this room has a better machine at home than they do on their desk at work? And like 98% of the people in the room put their hand up. And who's got an iPad or a Galaxy Pad at home? And 70% of the room put their hands up. Who's got a really shit computer that's black and a small screen on the desk at work? And again, it was a really high percentage to put their hand up. So it's a dragon we have to slay, Mr. Keene.
I'm not sure you and I can slay it. I think it's down to people waking up or going out of business. It's the kind of Kodak problem, isn't it? They're so focused on tiny little, shaving tiny little bits off their margin and their cost base that they forget that actually some of these things can make a huge transformational.
Can I ask, David, you brought up the whole issue of your 15-year-old son. It was your son, yes? Yeah. I'm curious though, because when I talk to businesses, and here at Johnson's Media, we work with marketing, across the board, and it's often that our customers are very, very focused on the youth market. And whether it's with my GUI, who are behind this podcast, it's developing apps, social apps. The focus is always on the youth, between 18 and 25. Are we missing the ball by focusing so much on youth?
It's a really, really good question. The backdrop to the original comment about my 15-year-old is more that they have, I think, less barriers. They naturally, they were born technology all around them. So you see tiny kids just reaching for, an iPad or a Nexus tablet or whatever, and just using it and using gesture controls, just naturally. People do focus on that kind of 18 to 25-year-old kind of window, and I'd say it's dropped down lower as well. I'd say it's probably 13 to 25 that they're focusing on. Certainly with much of the content and the games and stuff that are out there. It's an interesting question. I think it kind of leads on to the conversation of, how do we liberate maybe the people who are just working in these kind of older, more traditional manners with those small black computer or grey, or remember those beige computers we used to have?
There's one of those in our co-working space, just for old time's sake. Truly hipster.
That's beautiful. I haven't thought about one of those in about 100 years. I just had this vision of a big beige stack. Wow. Compaq or somebody named from the past.
Okay, I'm getting all emotional. So I'm just trying to think of a really cool way to wrap up here, and I wondered if you could throw something in there, a word of wisdom to close our session on, David.
Get rid of friction, look for excitement. Just kind of empower people. People know what they're doing. If you give them the right motivations and you take the friction, deal with all the hygiene factors, then people will pretty much do the right thing. Particularly if you treat them well. And maybe this is kind of like a halcyon view of the world, but certainly I've seen the most amazing places to work have been ones where they've been treated well and they've been given the tools. They've been asked to do kind of achievable things, and they generally go out and do those achievable things, and they do amazing.
And where can we find you online, David?
My Twitter account is dkeene, so that's at DKEENE. Best way to send me questions, comments, abuse.
Okay, David, and we'll put links to all that in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Please go to berniejmitchell.com/podcast. Bernie would love your feedback and input.